Welcome to Make It Plain from Make Plain Jesus Ministries, featuring Pastor James Bryan, where we take biblical truths in everyday situations and break them down to be as plain as possible. So, stay tuned and enjoy the broadcast.
Hello, and welcome once again to the Make It Plain podcast. This podcast series is one that is focused on the practical living with a Christian focus or a biblical focus, let's say it that way. And in this time that we have together, we want to begin to share a different topic from the other ones in the series, of course. And we want to talk about the topic of looking beyond the outside. Looking beyond the outside. You see, every day, and I would even test you right now, for those who are looking or, out the windows as you're driving or if you're walking or something, as you might have your ear pods in, and you might want to just look around and just see different people that are around you or passing you by. And as you do that, you're probably subconsciously making certain decisions about those people. And you're looking at the clothing and making some assumptions. You're looking at the height, the depth, the skin color, the athletic build or not. You're looking at all those different things, and whether you know it or not, much like Google gathers information, you're gathering subconscious information, and then you're making certain assessments. But I would tell you that in many cases, even for people who say that they're very good at this, there's so many cases in which people have made incorrect assumptions. And the person that they have figured they've, kind of looked at and understood who they are before even uttering a word may be very different, vastly different than what they thought. And so today I just want to look at that topic right now and letting us realize the importance of understanding who a person really is. And that's why we're talking about looking beyond the outside. This is important now in the time in 2020 where so many things have happened between the viruses, between the other concerns that have been expressed throughout the country and the world about the treatment of our fellow man and woman. And so we want to make sure that we begin to understand that God has a viewpoint on all of the relationships that we have and the interactions that we have with folks. Now, this is not intended in any way, shape, or form to be a political statement at all. But everything that we do really puts the Lord first, and everything is based on the biblical principles themselves, not just someone's idea. Now, as you come across this topic and you're thinking about your interactions, let me give you an analogy. If I came out to where you are, whether you're at home, whether you're sitting at a park, or wherever you might be, maybe you're out for coffee. If I came to you and in my hand, I'm extending my hand with something in it, and in it is a present. Now, if I have to use two hands to lift this box up or this container up to give to you, your first thought, whether you realize it or not, is, wow, this must be a great gift. Look at the size of the box. And so based on that, you're giving certain worth to that particular gift, even though you haven't seen it yet. And so what you do is you're assuming that it must be something great for someone to have it in a package that's that large and then bringing it to you. But the truth is, it could be just a big rock. It could be something else that's of little value. But we assume or guess the value is there because of the size. And if I continue on that analogy, think about it this way. Look at the wrapping that's around it. Now, I would say for those who are ones who wrap gifts during the holidays at Christmas and things like that, sometimes people do a good job and sometimes not so much. I remember several people, but I'll talk about my son, one of my sons at the moment. And so when he was young, he would help wrap, but he wouldn't put thought into how neatly it was wrapped or where the tape went. So there could be tape on the top, or on the side, on the bottom, in the corners. There could be tape anywhere. And in his mind, at that stage of his life was, it's wrapped, isn't it? Isn't that good enough? And so the recipient of that gift will first look at the wrapping paper and say, oh my. And then they would just look at it in amazement. But then they would say nice things once they realized that it was a young child who was doing it. And still there was love in that wrapping. So, but there was an assessment of what is in here. Is it still of value based on the way it looked? I've known grown-ups who wrap like that also, so I won't put everything on my son. Now, so again, that's us looking at the outside and making assumptions. Let me give you one more. I know I'll give you two, but let me give you one more. If you're riding down the street and you see someone else in a very nice, expensive-looking sports car that's gleaming, maybe it's candy apple red or some other color, your first assumption is, oh, that person has some money. But the truth is that person may not. And that may be the only possession they have, and they really don't have that. They're just struggling to make a payment for a couple of months to look good. Or they could have rented it for a special occasion. But we would have assumed or esteemed that person greatly because they seem to have something of real worth. But we haven't had a chance to know that person, so we don't really know. And so I find this intriguing because now as you watch the media and everything else, you see all the discussions about what's the value of life and does the value change based on someone's ethnicity, which, I'm not getting political, but a life is so invaluable and it has nothing to do with ethnicity. I'll just say that. But in it, you have all these discussions and things that are going on, and it's global now. And then you see conversations on how people are treating one another, and there's so much happening. But this isn't new. And in the sense of looking at the Bible, there are many instances where the early church had to deal with that. But I want to take one in particular from Acts chapter 10, and in it, this is the account of when Peter, who was one of the original disciples who Jesus called to be fishers of men, Peter had to deal with something that the Lord was really trying to work through him and work in him. And here's what I mean. You see, Peter came up very, very much knowing that he is a child of Israel, that he was a Jewish person from that time period and chosen people of God. And later on, after he was restored in ministry, he focused a lot and almost exclusively on the Jewish converts, those that converted or realized through an encounter who Jesus is and became some of the early Christians. But the Lord had worked in him on a couple occasions, this one in particular, where one day Peter was supposedly minding his own business and being a good new Christ follower and meditating before mealtime. So it's like the middle of the day. And all of a sudden he goes into a trance. So he's sitting there and in a trance, and he sees this vision in this trance. And in it, it's this slowly descending, I imagine, white sheet. And almost like you're going to a picnic. And all of a sudden it's coming down. And then to his amazement, not from a pleasant perspective, he sees what's on this sheet. And on this sheet are creeping things and bugs and all these other things that you would say, ew. But yet it was placed in front of him. And then he heard a voice from heaven that said, eat, take and eat. And he's like, no, I don't eat unclean things. According to the law, according to customs, and I would imagine just according to his taste, he's like, ew, I don't eat these things. And so he's looking at it. And so he made his statement, but again, what happened? He saw the whole thing come down all over again in replay. And he heard the voice say again that he should eat. And he's like, I don't eat, Lord, unclean things. And then a third time it came. And so at this point, he's looking and and he's coming out of his trance, and I can imagine him scratching his head thinking, what in the world just happened to me? I know I'm hungry, but still, what was this? And so he's thinking about it, and all of a sudden these folks came and knocked at the gate and were looking for him. And he's thinking, what's going on? And he realized they were Gentiles, meaning non-Jews. And all of a sudden he heard the Holy Spirit tell him to go ahead, go with them. So he let them come in, and then they spent the night and went up to their master's house, which was a centurion. And the centurion and his family, his household, were waiting for them. And during that time, the centurion told them why he asked for them and all these other things. And Peter's still trying to wrestle with his vision and the fact that the Holy Spirit explicitly told him to go. So now he's at the house, and he just opens his mouth and say, I realized something. Something that maybe I didn't think about too much before, but now I do. You see, he starts saying that, I perceive that God shows no partiality, which means that he's not worried about the outside of a person, what they're wearing, and those types of things. He's not worried about the superficial things. He says, but in every nation, whoever fears the Lord or goes after him and commits to him, that person's saved. So then Peter begins to go on and talk about, that he was in the ministry with Jesus, and he saw the miracles, and he saw Jesus go on the cross. He saw all those things, and then he saw, and Jesus, after God raised him from the dead, confirming all of that, confirming his power, his authority. And while he's talking, all of a sudden something amazing happens. Truly amazing. He's in this house that he said, even in the beginning, that it's unlawful for him to be there according to the Jewish law, because these people were non-believing. They were not Jewish folks. But yet he was there because of the direction that God gave. And then while he was talking, and a Pentecost experience happened, and all of a sudden the Holy Spirit fell upon them all, and they could see with the evidence and speaking in tongues and all these things going on, and he was amazed. And I can tell you that after that experience, even Peter, who considered himself close to the Lord and close to the move of God, he had to realize something. He had to realize that, in the end, it goes beyond what we think. In the end, it goes beyond our personal opinion or preferences. In the end, all that matters is what God thinks, what his will is. Now, the reason why that's important is, as you can see Peter's personality, if you've ever read the New Testament, you begin to see sometimes he makes rash judgments. And if he doesn't like something or someone, he'll tell you. He doesn't have a problem with expressing his opinion. And so now I'm sure that he had an opinion about those that were Gentiles. But the Lord had to work through him in a couple of occasions to let him know that these ones I've also called. So whosoever would call on him and surrender to the Lord, those are the ones that he's calling into his family. It doesn't matter what their skin color is. It doesn't matter what their economic situation is. It doesn't matter how many times they've told lies or done things that were unlawful. But when they've given their heart, that's what matters. And I think not only did Peter learn a lesson, but I think also we have to learn a lesson in our living with others. You see, when you talk about the great commandments, the first thing is always to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, meaning giving your everything to him. And then the second one is like unto it, as Jesus said, to love your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus is acknowledging that, or realizing that, you have to interact with other people. And you have to show the love that he shows. But how do you do that? Well, you can't do it just by looking at the outward appearance of a person. You can't do that by just making assumptions based on, well, I saw someone else like him before or like her before. So that means all those people are like that. All those people that come from, I'm making this up, Connecticut, or all those people that come from Idaho or come from California or whatever geographic area you want to say, they all act this way. Well, that's not really true. So we got to get to know one another and understand that you're not going to agree on everything. You're not going to understand everything. But yet you will be surprised there are more things that you agree on and can get along with and surround yourself with than there are that you separate yourself from. You see, a lot of times we have this challenge, and I've been guilty also, and I've had to repent on, I would say, more than one occasion. I won't tell you how many, but on several occasions where you make assumptions, you assume, and then you just don't want to deal with a person or group of people or whatever because you assume they're the same. But I've been pleasantly surprised, and I know it's the Lord working in me, that even when I've made assumptions about a person or several people based on the outward package, because I didn't look beyond the outside, that their personality would be totally different than what they appear to be. And then what ends up happening, I just have to chuckle and say, okay, Lord, I hear you. I hear what you're telling me. I understand what you're trying to show me. And so I try to get better. Have I gotten all the way there? Am I perfect? Not at all. Have I made progress? Most assuredly. And I want to continue to make progress. Because in the end, I want to please the one who's called me to this hour, right? To this moment. And so we all should have that thought. So let me just leave you with 3 thoughts on everything I just shared. First of all, understand that people are more than their appearance. Just because someone looks holy doesn't mean they are. Just because someone looks like a heathen or someone farthest away from God doesn't mean they are. Some of the strongest believers that I've ever met, they're the most casual, nonchalant people that may look kind of rough on the exterior. But when you hear them speak, when you interact with them, you can feel the presence of God and the love of God in them, which they exude for anyone who is around them. But I only find those things out when I have a conversation or interact with them. And so we have to get to that point. Secondly, I want to make sure that you realize that in this time where the media and everything else wants to capitalize on the problems, the pitfalls, and the differences, if you take a moment and get to look beyond the outside of a person, you may find that you have more in common than you have to argue about. So you have more things that are aligned than you have that are not aligned. And so if you think about it from that perspective, you begin to realize that, you know what? Rather than always reacting and let the anger or letting someone else get you upset or making generalizations about someone, you just get to know who the person is, looking beyond the outside and getting to understand what's going on. And then you begin to see God move. The third thing I want you to understand to that point is, no matter whether you understand or not, if you see God moving, you better stand back and let God be God. Because otherwise, without that, you'll find yourself trying to fight against God and you can't win, right? And so the Lord always says that he looks at the heart. He looks at the heart. He looks at the heart. When he looks at the heart of a person, that means he's not looking at the exterior. And so if you see God moving in a person, even if you didn't think that person was worthy, or you just didn't like that person or those people, you got to understand that if God's moving there, he's the ultimate arbitrator. He's the ultimate judge. He's the one that knows what's right and what's wrong. So don't find yourself on the wrong side of where God is and where he's moving. And so if you do those things, you'll find out that your relationships improve. you'll find out that life is more enjoyable. You'll find out that things are much better than other people would allow you to assume. And so that's what I want you to do going forward. Remember this in this nugget, that you can make it, even if you come across people that you don't like, that you don't care for, whatever the case may be. God can work something out there, and you may find that the people aren't as bad as you might have assumed. And so closing, okay, I'm going to do this one more time. I always joke about people who say they're closing or they're finishing, and they keep adding on. But I find that I have to point at myself because I do that sometimes. So bear with me anyway. And so this last one, I'll give you one example, and I've used this before, but not on the podcast. There was a point early in my secular career, I was working at this particular agency, and I was in this building, secure building, that had many layers of security. But in the actual workspace I was in, there was additional combinations to get in, and when you went in, there were no windows. And there were a finite number of people there, and I'm saying less than 10, and there was one person in charge, a gentleman literally from the back hills of Tennessee, was about, at the time, maybe in his early 50s, somewhere around 50, and he was probably about 6'4", 6'5". And so we interacted and I communicated, but it's just a cordial conversation, and that's about it. And so I worked there for a bit, and I was just going through and dealing with things, and he seemed to be kind of hard. But that was all right. I was going to prove that I can earn my keep and do the things I needed to do. So one day, my boss came and she was having lunch. And you know how people come and they ask you how you're doing all these other things, treat you to lunch, and you're thinking, what do they really want, right? Like you're being set up for something. And she told me that in this particular person's case, that he had been complaining about me for months. And they had been trying to investigate if any of these things were true, but they couldn't find any of those things. And she realized, and she said to me, I think he doesn't like you based on your ethnicity. And I was like, oh. And then she said, you have two choices. You can transfer out, or you can stay and just work on through it. And she said, if I were you, I would stay, but you have a choice. And I stayed. Guess what? Within about a year, and I do mean a year, it took a while. Within about a year, he came one day and said, you know what, James? I said, yes. He said, I was trying to get rid of you. I didn't like you. And it was all based on your outward appearance. And it's because of my background, he said, that I just didn't like anyone that had the outward appearance like you based on your ethnicity. I really didn't. But I realized I was wrong because I got to know you. I got to look past the outside. And I began to realize I was totally wrong in my beliefs and everything else. And so guess what? He and I became just about best friends. And he was inviting me over his house. He was checking in with me. I mean, we became really good friends at that point. But the only way that happened was because he chose to look past the outside and get to know the inside. So remember that throughout your day today and the days to come, make a special effort to do that. Don't get angry just because you've heard something on the news or that someone said that someone said that someone said. You know how that goes. But just try to look past the outside and get to know the inside. Until next time, hopefully this has made a difference for you. Have a good one.